In this hand, for PokerNews.com, featuring Tom Dwan and Phil Hellmuth, we get to find out if the new, disciplined Tom Dwan goes for a gigantic river bluff with the king high flush blocker on this 5 straight river. What do you think? Well, we'll find out together. Before we get started, if you enjoy this channel, do me a favor and click the like and subscribe buttons below. That's a good free way for you to support the channel, and I would appreciate it. In this hand, from High Stakes Duel, featuring 2 of my favorite poker players, Tom Dwan and Phil Hellmuth, Tom Dwan limps from the button with King 10 offsuit. You may say, why not raise? I think raising's fine. It's also fine to mix up your limping strategy a bit, assuming you want to have a limping strategy. Phil Hellmuth raises it up to 5 big blinds. Oh boy. Well, we're certainly not going to fold. We didn't limp this hand to fold it. I will say one benefit of limping hands like this is that if you know your opponent's going to be very aggressive against limps, then you can limp and then very confidently call, right? If your opponent's only going to raise over limps with really good hands, though, and you do limp this type of hand, you may actually want to find a nitty fold. Like, imagine Phil Hellmuth's range is actually just good aces, good Broadway hands, and strong pairs. Well, in that case, King 10 is going to be super dominated, right? But that's not who Phil Hellmuth is. If you've paid attention to these matches on Poker Go, you will know that Phil Hellmuth raises very aggressively with some really junky hands when he thinks you're going to fold. And very often, I think he uses really big sizings with his really junky hands, which is kind of a neat, interesting strategy that has, well, to some extent worked out for him because he's done pretty well in these heads-up matches. All right, Tom calls. You may say, why not re-raise with the King 10 pre-flop? Because if you re-raise with the King 10, what's going to happen is then if Hellmuth has garbage, he's just going to fold. And if he has a good hand, he's going to put a lot of money in. But if you are going to re-raise here, what are you going to make it? Like 25K? That's something like 30% of Tom's stack. It's a little bit to risk with a hand like this. Because then if you get jammed on, it's a fold, but it's probably close, especially if Phil is ever going to get super insane and go turbo zoom mode. All right. Flop comes. 5, 4, 2. Hellmuth checks. This is something else Hellmuth does. He checks a lot in spots where I would presume that you would want to bet with a lot of your range. And if you think about Hellmuth's range, if it's anywhere near reasonable, it's going to be a lot of big pairs, which are almost certainly good here, and a bunch of ace high that has a pretty decent number of outs, right? Notice if he has a hand like ace queen, he has 4 outs to the 3, and then probably 3 outs to the ace and 3 outs to the queen. So in most scenarios in that spot, you have about 10 outs, which is actually a pretty good draw, right? A lot of people may not realize this, but a gut shot with 2 overcards is pretty good, especially when your overcards are pretty likely to be live. Also, if you think about Phil Hellmuth's bluffing range, as we have seen, if you've been paying attention to this match, he loves to bluff with stuff like 7-2, 7-3, 7-4, 6-4, 6-3, etc. And on this exact board, a lot of those hands actually line up pretty nicely with it because he's going to have a whole lot of pairs or straight draws or straights even. So I think this is a spot where Hellmuth should probably bet very frequently. When he does check, alarm bells would actually be going off in my head if I was Tom. I would not think his range is mostly garbage and he's check folding. I would be pretty resigned just to lose this hand. Tom agrees. Check. Turns an ace of clubs. Tom now has the flush draw. This is another spot where you would presume a lot of players don't have a whole lot of 3s in their range, but I would not be shocked if Hellmuth does have some 3s in his range. Hellmuth does go for a 6K bet, which is great for Tom because now Tom can very confidently call with his king high flush draw. He's getting great odds. He probably doesn't want to raise here. You're going to find that in general, when you're developing a raising range, you want to raise with hands that can confidently get it all in, which would be what? Flushes, right? And then you also want to raise with some premium draws that can happily get it all in, but there aren't actually a lot of those here. And then you want to raise with some junky draws. What would be a junky draw? Maybe a hand containing like the 6 of clubs. Maybe something like 7-6 would be a hand you could consider putting in a raise. Maybe that's even too good. Maybe you want to do something like 9-6. 9-6 with the 9 of clubs, something like that. And the reason you want to raise with the junky hands is that you don't want to have a close, roughly break-even spot whenever you raise and then get shoved on. You'd much rather your decisions be very easy. Like if you raise here with a flush and get jammed on, obviously call. And if you raise here with the 9 of clubs 6, you obviously fold, right? And that's a nice way to go about developing your raising strategy, or raising range in general. That said, when your opponent does bet so small, like 6 into 20, you can start raising a little bit wider for value, which allows you to raise with a few more bluffs as well. So maybe in this spot, you can even raise with some straights, if you do have any. But like I said, Tom will not have a whole lot of threes. Anyway, I think this king high could win a showdown sometimes. I would not be shocked if Phil does show up with random, jack 9 of hearts sporadically. And he has a pretty clean draw to the nuts unless he's against the sporadic 3-2 suited of clubs. All right, river is the 3. Hellmuth checks. What should Tom do now? Should he just check it back and take a chop? Should he bet small, like a third pot? Should he bet big, like pot? Or should Tom go zoom mode, back from 2005, and rip it all in? Pause the video and write what you would do in the comment section below. This is a fun one because I'm not sure what Phil Hellmuth's range looks like. As Phil Hellmuth is very tricky and trappy, meaning he will check the river with some flushes or perhaps with some 6s, you have to be very careful in this spot when it comes to bluffing too often. That said, if you are going to be bluffing in this spot, you definitely want to have a good club in your hand, like the king or the queen, because that's going to block some of Hellmuth's auto calls, right? Hellmuth's going to call every time when he's sitting here with the king high flush or the queen high flush. And if Hellmuth does also have a hand, like let's say as ace king with the king of clubs, he's going to be very inclined to call if you do shove, because then he blocks some of your obvious value bets, right? So when you have the king of clubs or the queen of clubs or maybe even the jack of clubs in your hand, these are the times you do want to go for the aggressive bluff to try to just absolutely steal this pot from Phil Hellmuth. I probably would have gone all in. It's a scenario where I think you can certainly value jam with 6s, right? I realize that you could be against a flush sometimes, but a 6 here is almost certainly good. And if you think about Hellmuth's range, yeah, exactly, Phil Hellmuth may have some 6s, but most people will not. And if Hellmuth had a 6, he may even go for a bet himself on the river. I also don't think most people slow play quite often enough in general with a hand like a 6 or a flush on the river. So if you can start to discount flushes and 6s from Hellmuth's range, then it's a scenario where Tom has some flushes and 6s in his range, and Hellmuth has relatively few. And if that's the case, I think you definitely need to go for a bet. Now, the question is, how much should we go? Small bet doesn't really make sense. If you go 12,000 or something like that, you're going to get called literally every time, which is no good. If you go pot, will you get substantially fewer folds compared to if you go all in? And that's a tough thing. It's definitely a player-dependent scenario, and I do not know what the answer is against Phil Hellmuth. You will find, though, that some of your opponents will call a pot-size bet in this scenario almost every time, but will fold to a 2x pot bet almost every time. And you'll find some opponents will do the exact opposite. They'll call the all-in every time, thinking you're trying to push them off the pot, and they will fold to the pot-size bet, thinking that you're obviously trying to get value. So, depending on how your exact opponent thinks, you can certainly make one play or the other. That said, I think in general, this is a pretty nice spot to go all in, and that's what I would have done here. Tom goes check, though. Nitty old man. Rest in peace, Tom Dwan of the 2005, 2006, 2007 era. He would have gone all in, and would he have won the pot? What do you think? Not this time. Phil Hellmuth, maximum trapping with the 3-2 of clubs. Oh my gosh. He had the stone nuts. Doing everything he can to let Tom Dwan take the bait, but not this time. Let's think, how did this hand play out? Wait a second. Slow down, everybody. Tom limped. Hellmuth raises to 5 big blinds with the 3-2 suited. I told you. Tom calls. Hellmuth going for a check call or check raise, one of the two. Check. Goes for a small bet just to try to get some value. This is something I've also noticed Hellmuth does a lot, is when he has a really good hand, he doesn't go for big bets all that often. He's often going for these small bets to try to, I suppose, just get a little bit of money in the pot. And this could be a fine play, but if you think about this scenario here, if Tom has any pair plus a draw, he's going to call 10,000 or 14,000 in this scenario. And I think by going this size, yeah, you get called a lot, but you also just lose value, and you make the pot smaller than it would be otherwise. And especially if your opponent's not going to bluff in spots that I think are actually pretty good bluff spots, then you obviously would just much rather get more money in the pot than have a small pot in a scenario where your opponent's not going to bluff it off. That said, we know Tom can bluff it off. He'll get out of line every once in a while. But maybe Tom Dwan's developed some live reads. Maybe he could look and tell that Phil Hellmuth doing his classic pose. Maybe he could tell his heart was beating a little bit faster or a little bit slower. He was blinking a little bit differently, or his ears were shaking funny. Or maybe he got lucky and checked it back when Hellmuth had the straight flush. Who knows? We'll never know. Fun hand though, right? That's going to be it for today. If you enjoyed this video, do me a quick favor. Click the like and subscribe button below. Huge thanks to Poker Go for putting on this show. Make sure you check out Poker Go. Also, thanks to Poker News for hosting this video. If you want all the poker news, check out pokernews.com. Good luck in your games. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next time.